Welcome everybody to the November Ledge Rep Network meeting. Great to see your faces, or at least your names, logged in for this lunch hour. We have an exciting agenda for today, primarily focused on helping you understand the importance of our Department of Natural Resources and the influence of that body on school funding. It does not seem obvious, I don't think, to a lot of our education partners or to school directors and superintendents that timber revenue is actually a really critical part of the survival of our K-12 system and requires our consistent attention and advocacy. So part of today's messaging is giving you some context and background around that, and to help you be able to educate and inform your legislators about the importance of that work and ways that we can keep you engaged throughout the year on that. I want to be sure to acknowledge Russ Pfeiffer Hoyt, who is the chair of our Trust Lands Advisory Committee, and the smartest person that I know as it relates to this topic. When I have questions about trust lands, forest revenue, Russ is who I go to ask. And so if you too are curious following this presentation about how WSSDA engages in this work, please do see me and or Russ, and consider joining us for our TLAC session, Trust Lands Advisory Committee, at the WSSDA annual conference coming up in just, if you can believe it, 2 weeks is our pre-conference day. So woo! So with that, thanks again for being here. I want to introduce and welcome our friend, colleague, and partner from the Department of Natural Resources, Sarah Ogden. She has an informative presentation for you and an opportunity for you to ask questions. And so I guess what I'd say, Sarah, is would you prefer for folks when they have questions to wait until the end to type their questions in the comment? And then I can kind of help you field those. What's your preferred method of Q&A?
Oh, I'm good just to go ahead and address
Either way.
questions as we
Okay.
go. Yeah, that's
You are
great.
on mute.
Yeah.
So before you start presenting, I would encourage you not to
Am
be.
I muted?
Oh, maybe I'm on mute. Am I on mute?
No.
Okay, great. All right, I can hear you now. Great.
Oh,
Okay.
okay, good. I was like, uh-oh, if that's the case, something is really wrong.
No worries. I'm going to pass
Okay.
it to you now. Thanks again for being here. Really appreciate your partnership. Just one more note for y'all to know, Sarah and her colleagues join the Trust Lands Advisory Committee meeting that we have virtually every single month to provide us support, information, and next steps guidance on our advocacy work. So thank you for creating space for supporting WSSDA's advocacy interests in that regard, Sarah, and for being here today to give us some more context. So with that, I will pass it to you.
Excellent. Hi, folks. My name is Sarah Ogden. I'm the Trust Outreach Specialist for DNR. And I do have a presentation today. It's not super long. I figure we're probably going to have some dialogue back and forth. So feel free to jump in and ask questions at any point in time. All right. And the usual question, can everyone see my screen? Okay, awesome. Okay. We could skip through that, did the introduction already. So what I'm going to do is just a brief overview of DNR, and then I'm going to jump right into revenue streams and all of the intricacies when it comes to DNR managed timberland, because I feel like that's the meat of our discussion. You don't need to hear about all the DNR stuff. If you have questions, ask me later. I'm happy to talk about it more. But DNR manages about 5.6 million of acres of land across the state, and that's a combination of different types. So forest range, ag lands, aquatic lands, and then we also have commercial properties that we manage. And our state constitution, statute, federal acts and laws, and our Board of Natural Resources, those policies govern our work and laws govern the work that we do. It's very specific, and I can send you all the RCWs in the world to back up what we're doing. When it comes to trust lands, lands that DNR manages that our beneficiaries benefit from, there's about 2.9 million acres across the state. And the relationship is DNR is a trust manager, the state of Washington is the trustee, and then our counties and junior taxing districts are trust beneficiaries. And for our federally granted trusts, it's our universities and colleges are those beneficiaries. So here is a map of DNR managed lands across the state. And you'll see I've boxed, there's two boxes over there, a pink box and an orange box. And those represent the pink are federally granted trusts. And that's one bucket that school districts get money from. And then the other one, that orange bucket, is our state forest lands. So the two different buckets, and I'll go into more detail about those. One thing I did want to point out with this state image is all the pink on there. So it's on the east side and on the west side. That's the Common School Trust, and it is the majority of trust land that DNR manages across the state is Common School Trust. Okay, so let's go into buckets. State lands. These are federally granted trusts, and we got these on statehood in 1889. So it's in our state constitution, and how we manage these lands is governed by statute. And it's about 2.9 million acres across the state, as you saw in that map image, all the way over onto the east side as well. Beneficiaries are primarily public schools, universities, and colleges. And when it comes to sort of the revenue distribution, how we divide that up when we receive revenue from lands within those trust types, 69% of the revenue goes to the trust, and then 31% DNR keeps as a management rate to manage those lands. So here is a pie chart sort of showing you, obviously, that Common School Trust is huge. It's almost 1.8 million acres of our federally granted trusts across the state. And then you've got some other agricultural school, that's Washington State University. University Trust is University of Washington. That CEPR&I is our Correctional Institute Trust. Capital Grant takes care of our capital grounds and maintenance. Normal School are some of the smaller colleges and universities, including Evergreen. And then Scientific School is also Washington State University. They've got two, but the acreage is, as you can see, pretty even. But let's talk about Common School and Indemnity Trust. So it is in the Enabling Act of 1889, and there are a couple of sections that sort of spell out exactly how that land is set aside. So Section 10 talks about setting aside sections numbered 16 and 36 in every township of the proposed state for support of Common School. And if you think back to that map image, you can see those pretty clearly on the east side, that checkerboard of pink on the east side that really follows that section 16 and 36 in every township. That's pretty clear. You can see that over on the east side, it's been blocked up in different ways. So instead of having that checkerboard, they found in lieu lands to take the place of that. And those two things are specified in sections 13 and 18 of that Enabling Act. And it just allows the state to kind of find other land if that section numbered 16 and 36 is taken up with something else. So that you'll see, if we can go back to the map maybe at the end, and you can kind of take a peek at kind of how that shook out. Beneficiaries, K through 12 public schools. And this trust receives revenue from a number of sources. So it can be from timber, and it also can be from leases. So on the east side, we see a lot of ag leases, grazing leases. We see commercial sites, like building leases and that sort of thing, and communication site leases. So with this revenue flow, DNR manages the land. Obviously, we get revenue from timber sale, and then that goes to the state and is invested by the State Investment Board on behalf of beneficiaries. And then that money trickles down to funding. So it is interesting working for DNR, because we hear a whole lot about the revenue that comes from timber sales, but for federally granted trusts like Common School, there is a little bit of a separation between the revenue we produce and we pass it on, and then when it finally gets to you folks. And I'll go into that a little bit. So with a common school trust, school districts can access this fund through the SCAP program through OSPI. And that is a combination of funds from common school trust lands and then the state general obligation bond funds, which I don't know much about. I'm learning more every day and it's fascinating to me. But I'm focused on common school trust lands, and that's really in my bailiwick. So school districts can apply for major new construction or modernization projects, and they must secure local funding by passing a bond to apply for those funds. So the second bucket that I talked about back on the map of Washington State are state forest lands. And we divvy these up into two smaller buckets, two mini buckets. State forest transfer lands. These lands were foreclosed on by counties. These are private timberlands foreclosed on by counties back in the 1920s and 30s. And they weren't really able to manage the lands well. They needed to be reforested and taken care of. Many counties turned those over to state ownership, with the exception of Grays Harbor. They kept most of their transfer lands in that county, but everyone else transferred over those lands to the state, and DNR manages those for the counties that the lands exist in. So there's about 540,000 acres in 21 counties. And most of those counties redistribute to their junior taxing districts, like school districts, with the exception of Skamania and Wahkiakum County. Those folks do not go down to that junior taxing district level. And with revenue distribution from that particular mini bucket, 75% of the timber sale goes to the county, and then 25% DNR keeps as a management fee for those lands. And there's a smaller amount of these state forest purchase lands. And this is private land purchased and owned by the state. So it wasn't foreclosed on by counties. It was private land. The state purchased it outright, and then DNR manages it. Again, about 80,000 acres, not a huge bucket, but is still important. And I will say is mainly important in keeping that revenue distribution for transfer lands at 75% to county and 25% to DNR management. Our management of purchase lands and revenue from those lands helps us keep that management rate on the transfer lands lower. So it is really helpful in sort of making sure counties get maximum benefit. So 50% DNR keeps for management. Counties still get some of that, and I have a slide later on to sort of show how that breaks down. So 26.5% still goes to counties. And that's really to say, hey, we took these private lands off your tax rolls, and we are going to give you something back for that, essentially. And here is a graph showing the 21 timber counties, mostly in Western Washington, and then the breakdown of acres for those different mini buckets within state forest land. So the orange is that state forest transfer land. And you can see that that dominates state forest purchase, but that gives you a good idea of sort of what we have going on around the western side of the state. Do I have any questions? I just realized I'm not checking the chat.
I'm doing that for you, Sarah.
Oh, good. Okay.
You don't have to manage that too.
Okay.
There was
Yay. I'll just keep laughing.
That's great.
Okay.
One fairly clear question is, can we get access to this slideshow?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I put links should be live when I make it a PDF so you can see my references down at the bottom of the slide.
That's great. And
yeah.
maybe once you're done with the presentation, you could even just upload it into chat if that works.
Okay. Absolutely.
Great. Cool. Okay, proceed.
All right. Okay, so for state forest lands, the revenue distribution flows kind of like this. So we've got a timber sale on our state forest lands. That revenue comes to DNR. We keep that 25% in our forest development account. And then the 75% we pass on to the Office of the State Treasurer. state treasurer passes it on to the county treasurer, and then that county treasurer distributes the revenue to the taxing districts, just as other property taxes are distributed. And this is another I mentioned with the federally granted lands and the common school trust, there's a separation. There's sort of a wall between DNR that manages the timber, collects the revenue, and then disperses it. There's a little bit of a wall there because we don't know down to the junior taxing district level exactly what goes where. And I will talk about that in a couple of slides because I have a lot of fun sort of tracking that down and going to the assessor's office for every county just to think about like, okay, how is this timber sale going to break down for junior taxing districts and beneficiaries? It's kind of like an Easter egg hunt a little bit sometimes, but I think it's really important when it comes to letting juniors know, like, what can you expect? You know, what is the forecast for your district? Okay, so here is an example of a state forest transfer land timber sale. So this was a timber sale in Skagit County called Cracker Box, and it was all 100% state forest transfer, which is rare. Usually it's a combination of trust types. So if you look up there at the minimum bid amount is a little over $2 million. And then you can see 100% state forest transfer land. There's the percentage that DNR keeps for a management fee, and then the amount that goes to the county, about $1.5 million. And then that box below shows the breakdown for Skagit County tax code area. And you can see Cedar-Woolley School District would make almost $500,000 from that timber sale.
Sarah, while you say that, can you also let us know where specifically do the revenues from forest sales go? Is it only to the counties where the forests are located or to a general fund?
It goes to the counties where the forests are located, right? So if you look down through that, I keep wanting to say table, there we go. Okay. Skagit County is on there for $176,000. So that is their general fund, right? So Skagit County General Fund gets money from that timber sale, their county roads, Medic One, a hospital district, conservation futures, school district, state levy. And I think that's important. And we'll talk about that a little bit at the end of the presentation in terms of all these different avenues for education funding. So when I first started here 2.5 years ago, I was like, oh, it's just from the timber sales. But then you start looking at how those impact all these different levels of funding. It's really amazing. So the state levy is or levy 1 and levy 2, which are both for state education. And eventually make their way back to counties and school districts. Okay, so that's just transfer land. That's like the foreclosed lands, the amount that counties really benefit the most from. And then here's an example for the state forest purchase lands. And the breakdown for those is a little bit different, as I said. So the county would receive 26.5% of that sale. And I couldn't find a nice, even rounded number for a sale that was 100% state forest purchase land. So I found one that was 34% state forest purchase. It was in Thurston County. It's a Juneau sale. It's actually before the board today. So it may not go through, we'll see. But that is specific to tax code area 475. And then you can see that breakdown there. So the state, again, state levy 1 and 2, every county lists out their taxing districts a little differently. So that's one joy to doing this, is trying to find out like, okay, wait, what does this one mean here in this county? But that state amount is $92,000. There's a county amount, Medic One, Port of Olympia, Timberland Regional Library, my former employer, used to work for the library system, county roads, and then Rochester School District will get $96,000 from that, estimated, I should say. Because most of the time our timber sales are actually go 25 to sometimes 50% over the minimum bid amount. So these draft appraisals, they usually sell for more than that. But that just sort of gives you an idea of, even though it might be state forest purchase land, the county doesn't get a huge percentage of that. It still is a decent chunk of change sometimes.
Can you pause for a couple
Yeah.
questions? Yeah. So earlier in the earlier case, did Cedro Woolley know that the revenue was coming? And then in addition to that, there were 7 districts within that county. Why was Cedro the only one that received it?
Yes. Yes. So one of the things I think we receive the most feedback about is how can we know what's coming to the school district? How can junior taxing districts know what's coming into us? And we've tried to improve that. I think some of you folks have probably received a revenue report from DNR in the last couple of months where we try to say, hey, here are the sales that have been approved by the board in the last month. Here are sales that are upcoming in the next month, and sort of what you can expect in terms of revenue. And I think actually, yeah, this is a perfect place for this. One of the sort of downsides to relying on timber revenue is there is a timeline for that timber sale. So as soon as the sale sells, you don't see the full revenue amount, right? It's usually about 2 to 3 years after that timber sale goes to auction and someone purchases it. There's an initial lump sum that comes to junior taxing districts through the county at sale, but then the rest of it may trickle in. It may come all at the end in one big bang. It just depends on when those timber companies are harvesting, when's the best time for them, what are log prices like now, what's their backlog, what's the number of projects they have going. So I think that that multi-year window makes it hard to know for junior taxing districts and school districts, when is that revenue actually coming to us? So that's something we are working on, is like, how do we help districts understand sort of what's coming to them and when they might expect it. But that's one of the most difficult things, I think, to try to predict is that amount. And then your other question, I'll go ahead and flip forward here, has to do with sort of the complexities of funding. So with state forest lands, it is tax code area specific. So, Cedro Woolley School District, their tax code area boundaries may contain a lot of state forest land and state purchase land, and that's good for them. They benefit from that. But there might be other school districts within the county that don't have state forest land within their school district boundaries, and they would not get anything from state forest lands. And that's, I think, one of the difficulties is because it's so place-based, because it's limited to timber sale, we can't, for example, have a commercial lease on state forest land. It's timber only. And because schools, they might not have state forest land in their district boundaries, it creates sort of an inequity a little bit, right? And can be problematic. Did that get at your question, Marissa?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Yeah.
And then we also had a comment timely that, just noting that this approach doesn't necessarily provide a sustainable or
Yeah.
predictable, obviously,
Yeah.
funding source for any of our school districts, regardless of who benefits or who doesn't. So
Yeah.
it's just something to note. Mhm.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And, there are benefits, to the common school because it is a pooled and shared trust. Anyone can access that. It doesn't matter where your school district boundaries are, other than being in Washington State. Um, and there's definitely flexibility when it comes to acquiring lands in other counties because it is pooled trust and not tax code area specific. So there's some flexibility there, but I will note, and you folks probably, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. There is that trend of rejected bonds in rural school districts that sort of keep that common school funding at arm's length. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And just the one of the key problems is that obviously if school districts can't pass their bond, they can't access those dollars. My
Mhm.
understanding, there was hundreds of millions of dollars left on the table from
Yeah.
the from SCAP because school districts were unable to
Yeah.
get their voters to support that effort.
Yeah. And I know a superintendent Rachel, you guys, again, not telling you anything you don't know, but I know that he had some ideas, especially to help rural school districts get sort of a crack at that funding, without, having the bonds be as much of an issue. But yeah, you're right. I mean, both of these things, especially state forest land, it's not necessarily consistent revenue. And because DNR operates, we are trust blind when we lay out a timber sale. We can't go out and say, okay, I want to make sure, Cedar Woolley School District always gets this certain amount of money every year. Like, we can't do that. We lay out a timber sale and we can't, you know, um, prefer one trust type over the other one. And that also makes it difficult.
Sure.
Yeah. I will say there's been talk in the past, and I think it's like a perennial discussion about state forest lands and making them into some sort of pooled trust. So that would be shared. Um, and there's pros and cons, obviously, to that, but there are definitely rural school districts that have concerns about that because it does tend to be rural school districts that benefit a little bit more from state forest lands, and they don't want to give up, right? They don't want to give up the timber revenue that they have that's right in their community and that's specifically for them. So having it sort of fragmented and separated out doesn't make it more difficult, but that's not something for me to decide, definitely. But yeah, it's definitely something that folks talk about. So yeah, let's think about or talk about the future funding implications for future funding. I don't think it's a secret that timber sales are decreasing and our future in terms of timber sales remains uncertain. There's a board meeting going on right now. They may have already voted on the timber sale that were on the docket for today. But there's a lot of folks down there that are protesting and speaking out against timber sales in different counties, speaking out against timber sales that contain mature forests, or as they're calling them, legacy forests. So this is, it feels maybe uncertain, I think is the best word to use. So yeah, we've got lawsuits, protests. We're seeing a decrease in revenue from state forest lands and common school lands. And also we're facing this problem of trying to acquire land. So if we do set aside an area of state forest land or common school, we have to find land of equal value so the trust remains whole. And that's becoming a little bit more difficult, especially with state forest land. Because again, you have to have that in the same tax code area to benefit the same junior taxing districts. And that's really hard to do sometimes. A lot of that land is owned by private companies or private citizens, or has another use. So it's difficult to find land to sort of swap out. So the flexibility there can be really difficult sometimes. And I mentioned the state levy funding for education. When we see a decrease in state forest lands funding and revenue, that also decreases the amount that goes to the state levies from state forest lands. And then if we see a decrease in timber sales overall, we also see a decrease in quarterly excise taxes. And those are taxes paid by private timber companies for harvesting on both private and public land. So there's a quarterly payment that goes to counties and eventually trickles down to school districts, especially if you have a levy or a bond for that current year. So um, I don't mean to be all doom and gloom.
Oh, it's
But
it's great information. Thank you,
yeah,
Sarah.
okay. It is, it is a little uncertain. And I think what that spells out for you folks is the importance to make your voice heard at all levels of leadership and government. I mean, that's very important to talk about, what funding means to public school districts. I know we had a couple of school districts that were at the board meeting and made public comment this morning. You know, county commissioner meetings is another place that folks can make their voice heard. And then obviously, you know, legislatively, that's also important. But we're hearing a lot of input and feedback from conservationists and environmentalists that want things set aside. But it's important that beneficiaries' voices are, you know, um, of equal measure. And I think, you know, just, I mean, oh my gosh, it's election day, right? So we've got our Commissioner of Public Lands position is open, and we have 2 candidates for that position. And we'll sort of, it'll give maybe a better idea of where we need to speak up the most, perhaps, when that moves forward. But, you know, discussions about setting aside mature forests within DNR managed lands has repercussions when it comes to revenue and when it comes to funding to beneficiaries. So, yeah, we're going to see how that shakes out, and then that'll be another thing to make your voices heard about.
Yeah, and recognizing that today is election day, but we're not going to get political, not just because we're a nonpartisan
No,
organization. So we do care about the outcome, but we're not going to get into it,
no,
folks.
no.
But I'm curious as it relates to that, how influential is the commissioner over the trust, given that they are one vote within a board, right, that makes a
Right.
decision about the trust. So could you just speak again? Maybe it's on the last slide or makes sense. Could you just speak again to who gets to decide, like, whether or not the timber sales go forward,
Mm-hmm.
and who are the people that get to make that decision, and
Yes.
how much influence does the commissioner actually have in that space, and who else who we might talk to moving forward to help influence decisions of the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, we've got a board of natural resources. I said several times they're meeting. I'm kind of sad I'm missing out because it's always like, oh, that's okay. I can watch the recording. It's fine. Um, so yeah, our Commissioner of Public Lands, Hillary Franz, is on that board, as chair of the board. We've got a representative from Washington State University, Wendy Powers. We've got a representative from the University of Washington. We have a representative for our timber counties. Oh, let's see. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking. Who do we have?
It's
Oh, right. The
Lisa
governor's
Janicki.
representative. Yeah, Lisa Janicki. Oh my gosh. And then we have our representative for our governor. So Jim Cahill represents the governor on the board. And then we have Superintendent Reichdahl from OSPI. So all of those folks have a voice in the board sales and timber sales moving forward. And I think our staff does a really good job in presenting sales and detailing, you know, all of our efforts to conserve old growth forest, to make sure we're not harvesting on unstable slopes, you know, staying out of wetland areas, putting our stream buffers on, ground truthing every timber sale. DNR staff does a great job sort of going through a presentation for each of the sales and explaining exactly what's out there, how it benefits the state, and, you know, what we're doing to make sure we're protecting everything that we need to protect by law, by statute.
So could you just say again, thank you for
Mhm.
some of the names or seats for the
Yes,
board. Those are all in statute, right? So
all in statute. Yeah, yeah.
how
There's been
many
some,
how many board members are there total?
that's 6.
6.
Jim, CBL. I always feel like I'm forgetting someone. It feels like it should be 7.
Feels like it should be 7 in case there's
Jim
a
Cahill,
split. So who
Lisa.
splits if there's a tie vote on
Yep.
a timber sale? Who splits the vote? Who gets to decide?
Well, it has to be majority vote. So
Okay.
there's not a tie. It can't really tie.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's a simple majority to make a
Yeah.
decision. Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah, so those are all folks that you can talk to, and of course, because it is an election year, there's gonna be maybe a little bit of a shakeup, although depending on sort of yeah, we'll see, I don't know, the superintendent is up for reelection, there's gonna be a new governor, there may be a new governor appointee, so Jim Cahill may not be, stand-in for the governor, so there
Yep,
could be
there's lots
some
of swirl,
right, some movement
which
there, we'll see.
which creates a really important
Yep,
opportunity for us to
yeah,
voice at this moment in time our needs and concerns for sure. I'm just gonna, I know you're close to the last slide, but there are a couple questions slash comments I just
mhm,
surface. Really good point from Russ about given the unpredictable nature of the forest sales, that those dollars be used on not on salary, which is
right,
obviously an annual need. And then a comment about when revenue sales actually come in, which is rare, that it's spent primarily on maintenance items. So that's a decision
yes.
by one of the beneficiaries to use it on something that's needed in that moment in time. And then another point, just to illuminate the fact that if the prototypical model, prototypical school funding model, not your problem, Sarah, but we'll take all the advocates we can get, that and other ways of funding K-12 were ample, not just adequate, but ample, we would be less reliant on
Mm.
these funding sources. Although, again, maintenance always needs to be covered. So we're not rejecting the idea we could use these dollars, but because it's less predictable, it makes it really difficult for our districts. Not even less predictable, but it's, the SCAP dollars are contingent upon
Yes.
voter support. So it
Yeah,
makes it challenging.
absolutely.
One
Yeah.
one question before we move on.
Mhm.
How much does the Growth Management Act or GMA affect forests? Are they off limits because of that? Easier to rezone for development, or what might it take to rezone for development? Anything on that you can share?
Yeah, our trust lands, there I feel like there's not much that's easy about trust lands in terms of, transferring them to other entities or, even transferring them to, other divisions within DNR. So we can transfer trust lands into conservation status, for example, through trust land transfer. Um, It's really difficult to rezone for development. I mean, that's one of the reasons I think that we're so, pro our trust lands and so hesitant to try to, transfer out of them, is that we understand how important it is to keep trust lands forested and keep them in timber development, not rezone, because that means, a loss of green space and forest land, and revenue for beneficiaries. Um, I will have to dig in a little bit more to the Growth Management Act, and get back to you though about that. That is something that does not come up very often in terms of trust lands. But now that I'm like thinking about it, I'm like, I don't know enough about that. So let me look into that a little bit more and just make sure that I'm speaking correctly and get back to you folks on that one. And yeah, Russ mentioned it's up to the commissioner to bring timber sales to the BNR in the first place. She approves the slate of sales that are moving forward to the board. Um, and then the board votes. And interestingly, they're the board of appraisers for those timber sales. So technically, they're voting to approve the appraisals for the timber sales. And that approval of the appraisal number is what moves them forward and allows them to be eligible for auction. But it's definitely seen as like a voting for or against timber sales, which is not quite the functionality of the board, but I think it's definitely become that for a lot of people.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I will also send you a link to the board members because I'm not sure why. I was just in there in the room with them. I'm not sure why my brain's spaced on people's names. But I can send you information on that as well. So you kind of know who you're dealing with, if you want to talk to folks.
Yeah, access to names, contact information,
Hmm.
recognizing they may be different in 3
Yeah.
months. And then whatever opportunities our members have to weigh in on timber
Mhm.
sales and
Yeah.
what's the process for signing up. I know that the sign up list gets full fast. So
Oh, it
any
does.
recommendations on strategies to sign up and get in line, so that our voice can be heard. And then
Yeah.
I'd be curious from you, Sarah, as you've been in the room more than a lot of
Mhm.
us, except for us. Um, uh, what are some of the things you think the board members need to hear more of besides just we need those resources? Like what's some of the more detailed information that our
Mhm.
school districts could be bringing that would be most helpful in shaping the conversation to
Yeah.
support K-12?
Yeah. So I think one of the first things I will mention is, and Russ remembers this. We used to meet, or WASDA used to meet with the commissioner um, before or after the board meeting. Russ, do you remember? It was either before or after on board meeting day. They had a time slot set aside. WASDA did, and that sort of went by the wayside. I feel like it's been almost a year and a half, I want to say, since we've had one of those meetings. And I would say with our next commissioner, making sure that that time slot, um, is set up again, because I feel like that was really essential in sort of sharing out, WASDA's list of things of importance, things that they really wanted the commissioner to be aware of, and to have some of that back and forth dialogue. So I would say, number one, push for that with with our new commissioner and make sure that gets set back up. I think for school districts, the revenue part is important. Stories about how revenue has been spent. So we had Noah Glaude. He is not in a school district. He directs the North Olympic Library system up in Clallam County. And he just had a really nice story during a public comment about what they used timber sale revenue for. And it was for a capital expense. It was for a building, a new library, or an addition onto the library, I think. But it was just a really nice story. It highlighted how they are using this. So I would say that is a great way to go about it. Not just we really need the money, but here is how we use it and how it benefits our community. And then I think trying to put school districts into context in a community is also really important. And I'm trying to think of another good example about sort of how that was done. Um, I mean, I think if we think about the revenue too much and we focus on the money too much, we miss out on some of the other things to talk about. Maybe you step outside the school district and you talk about, we see a lot of people that come in and enjoy recreation within our county, right? On DNR managed lands, on state lands, and we see a benefit from that here. Or, you could talk about other junior taxing districts within your county, or someone talked about roads, right? Like, these are all, it's good to paint like this big picture. School districts are so important, but then zoom out and sort of show how they fit into the community. I think that really is helpful in sort of getting that message across. Partnering with other junior taxing districts and coming as sort of a mini coalition from your county would be a great way, because it shows that interplay, right, between different taxing districts and funding, and how it's not just, oh, if you vote against this, you're voting against one school district. It shows like you're voting, against all of these things. And here's how we work together to make our community great. Um, yeah,
Yeah, that's
that's what
that's
I would say.
great advice. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think some of the questions that are popping now are about trust lands. I want to give
Mhm.
um, Russ some space here towards the end to market that opportunity for our members to participate in the work of TLAC. Anything else, Sarah, that you would want us to know before we pivot to that? Or any questions from y'all for Sarah about BNR, DNR, trust lands?
Oh, thank you to whoever popped the Board of Natural Resources roster in there. Oh, yeah.
Do you mind staying for just a couple more minutes in
Yeah,
case
that's
something
fine.
pops up? I know you're missing the board meeting, but
Oh, it's okay. It's too late for that. It's fine.
Russ, would you like to, I know you answered Jen's question in the chat, but would you mind, for the benefit of the whole group, talking a little bit about trust lands, when we meet, what we do, and what you need from our collective membership to support the aim?
Yes, thank you. So Trustlands Advisory Committee does advocacy with the DNR and also with the legislature on trust revenue issues. As Sarah mentioned, we have traditionally, in probably the 20 years that I've served on the committee, met fairly frequently with whoever the commissioner is, and I think that's been very valuable in coordinating our efforts. We work with the DNR to advocate for legislation of mutual benefit. So that's something that's been beneficial both to WSSDA and to the DNR. And then I also, so we educate WSSDA members on trust lands issues, and then we also have served a role for advising individual school districts, particularly those school districts that receive state forest revenue, in what it is, how it's received, how to anticipate what you might receive, and then how you can maximize how you can if you have a capital projects levy, you can increase the revenue that your district gets beyond that which you can generate just through an educational programs levy. So I've had a number of school districts ask me to help them walk through it, and I've met with them. I've visited the school districts. I've helped them figure out how they can get the money to replace a roof, those kind of things. So we get involved in the kind of the nuts and bolts of how districts can benefit from trust revenue.
And if you are interested in learning more, please reach out to me, and we'll be sure to keep you apprised of the work.
And I want to add too, so we have scheduled, and Marissa can correct me if I'm wrong, is it Saturday morning?
Friday.
Friday morning at annual conference, a trust land advisory committee meeting, and we hope to, if it's clear who the next commissioner who the successful commissioner candidate will be by then, we hope to invite them to participate in that meeting. So if that happens, I would like to have as many WSSDA members possible, so that we can get that dialogue and a welcome going right off the bat with the new commissioner.
Yeah, and just for some additional details, it is Friday, November 22nd at noon. Actually, it's a lunch meeting. Lunch will be served in that room. And that would be a great time if we are able to get the new commissioner there with us to bring forward some of those items that Sarah suggested, like how has revenue already been spent? What's the context within the full community, and the importance of resourcing to support not just the K-12 system, but also for all the community around it. So
I would like to add one other thing that Trustlands gets involved with quite a bit is working with the superintendent of public instruction. Since the superintendent is a member of the Board of Natural Resources, and our duties to represent the school children of the state overlap,
I'm just watching the Ledrep network.
What's that? Oh, I'm sorry.
you're okay.
So our duties overlap. So we try to meet with and cover issues of mutual interest. And one thing that the superintendent has, an initiative that our current superintendent, Chris Reckdahl, has developed is one that WSSDA has supported through our legislative assembly, is moving at least a significant amount of the common school trust revenue from the SCAP, the School Construction Assistance Program, to Small Schools Modernization Grant without and backfilling that amount in SCAP from other sources, so that this is a way that we can help those districts in the state that have the hardest time coming up with community uh, with votes, positive votes from the community on bonding, and I think that would be if we're able to do that, accomplish that legislatively, I think it would be a great move forward in using the Common School Trust revenue for those districts of the highest need throughout the state. And they're across Eastern Washington. They're also across Western Washington. So what we're looking at is currently would be districts of 3,000 students or less in that is in our advocacy for that category. So I think we would want to cover that with a new commissioner too, so we can try to get everyone on board for the same idea.
And to add to that, that any of the unspent SCAP dollars, as I referenced before, remain in the school account for future use in case there is an opportunity for those dollars to be spent on what they were intended to, as opposed to them being repurposed into other sectors, perhaps, because those dollars are specifically intended for K-12. So there was conversation in a previous legislative session about whatever unspent dollars in SCAP, because districts had rejected bonds, would be repurposed somewhere else. And we say, no, no, no to that. Okay. What a great conversation. I hope your brains grew. Because, you know, we don't have enough things to learn as it relates to K-12 funding. We're just pouring it on. But this has been so helpful, Sarah. Really appreciate having you as a resource and a colleague and an ally in this effort. More work to be done. We're all going to be learning about some new leadership and how we have opportunities to advocate with some new folks in seats. So thanks for being here. And thank you so much, Russ. Really appreciate it.